Chapter 12. An Exciting Discovery. "My boat!" Chris was fighting hard to keep back tears. "It is gone! No more boat! No more chance to find treasure!" "Gosh, yes," Bob said, realising Chris's loss was much greater than theirs. "What got into that guy anyway? Was it an accident or did he do it on purpose?" "On purpose," Chris said angrily. "Or else he would stop, see who owned the boat, say he is sorry." "I suppose so," Bob said. "But why on earth would anybody want to wreck your boat, Chris?" "Keep me from hunting treasure," Chris said. "Lots of fishermen don't like me, don't like any strangers. Think the bay, the whole place belongs to them." They stood there a moment longer, unable to decide what to do. They were hungry, there were no other boats in sight, and no way to signal. How long would they have to stay there? "Well, anyway," Bob said at last, "we didn't lose the scuba equipment. It's pretty valuable and I'd hate to have to pay for it." "Gosh, yes," Pete said. "This kind of equipment costs hundreds of dollars and—" "Wait a minute." He and Bob looked at each other, the same idea coming to them in the same instant. "Why, we can dive down for our clothes!" they exclaimed together. Chris grinned, shaking off his gloom. "We can all dive," he said. "I am the son of a Greek sponge fisherman. I bet I can dive better than you, even if I don't stay down so long." Now excitement spurred them on. Bob and Pete got swiftly into their scuba diving gear, and they all waded out into the bay. They swam to the reef and walked over it, then lowered themselves into the deep water beyond. The sunken sailing boat was a glimmer of white on the bottom, seeming to sway gently as small waves washed the surface. Bob and Pete began to propel themselves downwards with their flippered feet. Chris had picked up a rock from the shore and, clutching it in his arms, he sank rapidly past them. He reached the sand beside the wrecked sailing boat before they were halfway down. He rummaged inside the boat, which lay on its side, for the clothes they had stowed neatly under the seat. With his arms full, he shot upwards. They could see him grin as he went past. In the peacefulness of the ocean depths, Bob and Pete for a moment forgot their plight. They were scuba divers doing a real salvage job, even if only on a tiny sailing boat. Close together, they kicked down to the boat and grasped the side. The sail rippled in the water, and they had to take care to avoid being caught in it. They examined the interior of the boat. Chris had missed a pair of pants, Bob's pants, and Bob swam a few feet to rescue them. Pete had to dive for one of Chris's shoes that slipped away from him and began to move away along the bottom. In fact, a fairly strong current seemed to be moving the whole boat, and when they let go of the side, they had to swim to get back to it. After 5 minutes, they figured they had everything that could be rescued, and Bob nodded to Pete. They kicked upwards. They broke water to see Chris standing on the reef waiting for them. He grinned as they climbed up on the rock with their salvage. "We do not do so bad, yes?" he said. "I guess we got everything." He took his clothing from Pete and examined the soggy bundle. Then his face fell. "My compass is not here," he said. "Nice one. I'll go back down and look." He dived into the water. "I guess we might as well take our stuff ashore and spread it out to dry," Pete said. "I sure wish we had some way of signalling," Bob said. "Your dad will think we were mighty careless getting stuck on this island again." "It wasn't our fault, or Chris's fault either," Pete said. He picked up the 2 heavy-duty underwater flashlights they had rescued from the sunken boat. "I'm sure glad we got these back. They're expensive. And if we have to stay until dark, we can signal with them." "Golly," Bob looked at the sun. "It's quite a while to dark. I hope we don't have to stay here until then. I'm starved." "Let's get our clothes dry, then see what we can think of," Pete suggested. They slid their face masks into place, then eased into the water and swam to the hand. Wringing out their clothes, they spread them flat on the warm rocks, which promised to dry them in no time. They'd removed their face masks and were starting to get out of their scuba equipment when they suddenly realised that Chris had not reappeared. They'd been busy for at least 10 or 15 minutes, and Chris was still underwater. That could only mean trouble. "Golly," Bob blurted out, "something must have happened to Chris." "Maybe he got caught down there." Pete went pale at the thought. "We have to try to rescue him." Without another word, they got back into their diving gear and started paddling for the reef. They stood on the rocky ledge a moment, staring down into the sunlit green water. No moving form that could be Chris caught their eye, nor could they see the sunken sailing boat now. Together they shoved off into the deeper water and started propelling themselves downwards, their hearts beating fast with anxiety. There were cavities in the base of the reef hollows formed by the currents. Maybe Chris had been pulled into one of them and got stuck. Or could he be tangled in the sail or trapped beneath the boat? Soon they located the boat. Underwater currents had sent it bumping along the bottom of the reef for about 20 feet. They headed for it, but Chris wasn't in the boat. Bob swam down until he could touch the sandy bottom. He peered under the boat fearfully, but Chris wasn't there either. Whatever had happened to him, he had not got caught in the rigging. Bob knew there were no sharks in these waters, or other deadly fish. What other danger could Chris have encountered? Pete touched his arm. He held up 2 fingers side by side, then pointed towards a rock formation. Bob understood. He meant they should investigate the rocks together. Underwater, you always stayed close to your buddy in case of trouble. Bob nodded and they set out, kicking themselves along vigorously. The bottom of the reef was irregular. In places, small dark hollows had been cut by the swift current. They peered into each hollow place, wishing they had brought the underwater flashlights. But all they saw were swarms of little fish that swam hastily away at their intrusion. Seaweed made waving curtains in spots, and they had to push it aside to peer into the water beyond. At least 5 minutes passed. They had covered a good 100 feet without a sign of Chris. They paused and put their face masks close together. Bob could see Pete's eyes wide and anxious. Bob pointed back in the other direction. Pete nodded. Side by side they kicked rapidly back towards the sunken boat. They had almost reached the sailing boat when a swiftly swimming figure shot past them. It was Chris, and he was in a hurry to get to the surface. How could Chris have stayed underwater for 20 minutes without any diving gear? They headed for the surface. Chris was sitting on the edge of the reef in waist-deep water, gulping great breaths of air into his lungs. He certainly didn't look hurt, and he was grinning broadly. They came up beside him and shoved up their face masks. "Good grief, Chris, you gave us a scare," Pete exclaimed. "Where were you?" Bob asked, grinning with relief. "What happened?" Chris threw back his head and laughed merrily. "I find something," he said, and held up his right fist tightly closed. "Guess what?" "Your compass?" Bob asked. The Greek boy shook his head. "Guess again." "A gold piece?" Pete cried. Still grinning, Chris opened his hand. An irregularly shaped, shiny gold blob lay in his palm. It was rather battered, but it was certainly a gold piece. "You'll never guess what I find," he said. "A treasure chest?" Bob said hopefully. "Buried in the sand?" "No, not that. I find a round opening in the bottom of the reef. Fish swimming in and out. I think if fish can swim, Chris can swim. I swim in." He paused dramatically. "I find an underwater cave under the island. I find this doubloon in it. I bet there is a lot more treasure down there."